All right, welcome back to the Witch's Lair. I'm Haley, and today we're actually going to be talking about the summer solstice. Um, for those of you on your path, I don't know, how many of you are working with the wheel of the year and working with the earth. I feel like it's a majority, but it's something that I've always done. I've always been someone who works with the Sabbats. I've always, enjoyed connecting with them just because it helps me connect with the earth. So as we go through it, as we go through this podcast, I'll be touching on them as the seasons are coming. So and that's how I like to do the whole freaking podcast is just making it live and with where we're at now. So it kind of helps you craft as you go. Uh, and so I just did the Gemini episode because we're now at the tail end of Gemini season, but I wanted to share about Gemini. And it's so funny because I was actually listening to that podcast and I was just like, damn, you freaking talk like a Gemini. Like I was so fast with my words and things like that. So I thought it was really, really funny when I listened to it because I was like, ah, the spirit was within me. So whatever. But we are now creeping up on Cancer season. Cancer season and Litha go hand in hand. They are one and the same, um, which I love. And we're going to have Mercury going to retrograde on the 29th of June, the same day that we're having a Capricorn full moon. So really, really crazy stuff to see because Capricorn and Cancer are polar opposites. So I'm really eager to see how this Litha season goes. But yeah, so as we go through this episode, we'll hit on different points of it. But with Litha, this is the moment in the year where the sun reaches its highest point. The light reaches as far as it can go. The day lingers. The evenings take, its time. The world feels warm, full, alive, loud. And that's Litha. That's the summer solstice. Midsummer is also its name. Or if you're Druidic, Celtic, Druidic, it's Alban Heffen. If I'm enunciating that wrong, we've talked about this before. Don't judge me. But anyway, it's the moment where it's the longest day of the year, basically, for us. It's the peak of the sun's power. Everything's illuminated. The flowers are open. The fruit is ripening. The earth is bursting with life. Fire is high. The pulse of the world is strong. That's like the spiritually, the season actually asks us, can you let yourself be seen in your fullness? Not the polished version, not the version that is trying to be acceptable, not the version that shrinks so other people are more comfortable, but the full version. The bright version, the warm version, the passionate version, the version of you that wants to create and feel and love and move and laugh and dance and desire and live. Life is not quiet magic. It's not the whisper in the dark. It's not the hidden, pieces in the corner of the room waiting for permission. Life is the fire. It's the fire in the center. It's the candle on the altar. It's the bonfire on the hill. The sun at the height of its strength saying, here I am. That's what I love about life is that it's not just about light for the sake of light, because the sun, reaches its peak, as soon as it reaches that peak, something shifts. And as soon as it reaches its peak, the longest, day that marks the beginning of the slow return of darkness. That's what it is. So as soon as it gets there, the peak of energy, peak of sun, it starts to wane, just like the moon, and it starts to creep into the darker seasons. And you know, I think that's the medicine of the Sabbath is that it teaches us that fullness is sacred, but it's not permanent. And joy is sacred, but it's not something that we can hold hostage. Power is sacred, but it's meant to move through us, not trap us in one season forever. So this is a celebration, yes. It's a celebration of abundance and passion, fertility and vitality and success and, life force. But it's also a reminder that the wheel is always turning. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about Litha as a peak of solar power, but also the turning point. We're going to go over, the history, the folklore, the fire, the fae, the correspondence, the rituals, and the deep spiritual meaning behind this bright and beautiful Sabbath. So Because, Litha is not just asking us to celebrate the sun, it's asking us to notice where we are afraid of our own light. Where are we afraid to be fully alive? Where do we dim ourselves, before anyone else can see us? Where we prepare for the dark before we have even let ourselves enjoy the warmth? So let's step into the longest day. Let's stand in the fire and let's talk about Litha. Litha is one of the 8 Sabbats on the wheel of the year. It marks the summer solstice. You may also hear it as called midsummer, the summer solstice, or the Druidic tradition, like I had mentioned, Alvenhefen, which means the light of the shore. This is the longest day of the year. So in the northern hemisphere, it usually falls somewhere between June 20th to the June 23rd, most commonly June 21st. In the southern hemisphere, it falls in just like, I think it's the same dates, just December. So the difference, 20 to the 23rd, which is kind of funny because that's how astrology signs are. They are usually anywhere between the 19th and the 22nd of the months. So it's interesting how that is. But with that, it's also astrologically, it's where the sun shifts into Gemini, from Gemini into Cancer. So again, those 20th days, 19th, 20th, that's when we shift into a new sign. So we're coming out of Gemini, we're going into Cancer, and we're moving from air into water. We're moving from conversation into feeling, curiosity into tenderness, that scattered brightness of Gemini into the emotional waters of Cancers. And I don't know, I think that matters because life is not always about the sun being highest in the sky. It's also about what the light has grown. So by the time we reach the summer solstice, the earth is not just waking up anymore. She's awake. She's alive. She's producing. She's blooming. She's showing us the result of everything that has been stirring since spring. So again, flowers are open, fruit is ripening, the fields are full, days are long, heat is settling in. Texas. The world feels charged. So, and that's why life is associated with abundance and vitality, fertility, passion, success, and solar power, because it is the peak. So like if Yule is the rebirth of the sun, then Litha is the sun standing in its fullness. This is the moment where the light has reached as far as it can go. And because of that, I like to think of Litha as the sun's version of a full moon, because the full moon, when its height, and as soon as it's full, it starts to peak and turn into a waning moon. That's why when I manifest with the full moon, I don't go for 100% luminosity. I like to go for like 90%, 85 to 90, because it's still creeping up. Because as soon as she hits it, she turns. And so the same with Litha. That's what we are. We're at the turning point. So this is when the solar energy reaches its height. It's visibility, the life force, illumination of it all. It is the sacred fire of creation at its strongest point. But this is where Litha gets deeper than just sunshine, flowers, and bonfires. Yes, life is bright, it's warm, it's abundant, it's the peak of, the sun's power. But with it being the turning point, I think it's one of the most important parts of the Sabbath, because at the summer solstice, when the light reaches its fullest expression, the day stretches as long as it can, and the sun stands in the highest it can stretch. And then almost immediately the shift begins, the day slows to slowly starts to shorten. The nights slowly begin to grow, and the dark half of the earth starts to make its way back. And I feel like it can feel strange when you really sit in it, because we're celebrating the light at the exact moment it begins to fade. We're honoring the fullness while also knowing that fullness can never stay forever. And to me, that's the medicine of Litha, to remind us that the peak is sacred, but it's not permanent. The flower blooms, but it doesn't bloom forever. The fruit ripens, but eventually it must be picked. The fire burns high, but eventually it becomes an ember. And so the sun reaches its height, but then then it starts to descend. And, none of that makes the light less meaningful. If anything, it makes it more sacred, because Litha, it teaches us how to celebrate without clinging, and how to receive joy without immediately preparing for loss. And Litha teaches us how to stand in the beautiful moments without trying to control how long it lasts. And I think A lot of us struggle with that. I struggle with that. I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I'm having to constantly uh, remember to just enjoy the moment in front of me, enjoy it while I have it, because it's like, this is all I've ever wanted. It's right here. Why not just enjoy it while it's here? Um, but we're just like, oh no, what if that's very life of coded of just like standing in the moment and enjoying it while it's in front of us. And, sometimes when things are good and we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, we're bracing, we're scanning, we're thinking, okay, what's going to go wrong? So instead of us actually enjoying, instead of letting ourselves be in the warmth, we're immediately mentally already in the dark. So Litha reminds us that the dark will come as on its own, and it'll come soon. So we don't have to rush it. We don't have to ruin it by fearing its end. We don't have to abandon joy just because joy is temporary. The wheel will turn whether we panic or not. And, the Sabbath acts, it asks us to practice presence, to stand in fullness and actually feel it, to notice what's blooming in our own lives and to honor what has grown and to celebrate what is alive and to let ourselves be, warm. It begins, we meet that too. Not failure, not loss, but part of a cycle. Because the dark is not the enemy of light. The dark is where the seed rests, where the body recovers, where the spirit listens, and where the next life begins forming in the unseen. And that's the rhythm of the wheel: growth, fullness, release, rest, rebirth. Life sits at the place of fullness. It is the golden inhale before the exhale, the bright crown of the year. Look at what's grown. Look at what's alive. Look at what's thriving. Look at what the light has made possible. And that's why this Sabbath is so powerful, because life that invites us to celebrate what is here while also remembering that no season lasts forever. It teaches us to honor the peak without clinging to it, to feel joy without bracing its end, to receive abundance without immediately fearing loss, to stand in the light without apologizing for being seen. So when we talk about Litha, we're not talking about a date on the calendar. We're talking about a threshold, a solar climax, a seasonal turning point, a celebration of life at its fullest, and then the first whisper that the dark half of the year is beginning to return. And that is sacred paradox of Litha. The light at its peak, the dark is returning, the celebration is real, the turning is already happening. Litha teaches us to hold joy with open hands, to let the fire warm us without demanding that it burns forever, to trust every descent has a purpose, and to remember that even when the light begins to fade, the sun has not abandoned us. It's simply moving us into the next part of the wheel. And, with Litha as the peak of sun and the turning of the year, magic is it's not just bright, it's charged, it's alive. It's one of those times in the wheel of the year where the natural world feels like it's humming. Again, sun is high, the days are long, the plants are reaching, the fruit is ripening. It's not quiet. It's fire magic. It's a fire festival. It's a fire element. It is fire magic. Litha is those fire elemental Sabbats, and fire being one of the elements that we love to romanticize, but it's just not always gentle and simple. It's warm, it illuminates, it protects, it transforms, it destroys what no longer can remain. It is creation and it is cleansing. It is hearth and it is the wildfire. It is, the candle on the altar and the bonfire that can be seen far away. And it's not a tiny spark like Aries season, Beltane. This is not a tiny spark we're trying to keep alive. It's not the first fragile flame of inspiration. It's not a little light that we're shielding from the wind. This is solar power, full solar power. Again, vitality, confidence, passion, desire, will, courage, and life force. This is the part of us that says, I'm here. And for some of us, that can feel powerful, and for others, it can feel terrifying. Uh, And we really witnessed that fear when we did our Litha celebration for Women's Circle. I had everybody talk in third person and talk about themselves like they're a goddess, to talk positive on ourselves, because, talking kindly and highly of ourselves is really foreign. And I had a handful of girls decide not to come because they couldn't do it. Talking about themselves felt uncomfortable. Talking about themselves in a positive light made them feel uncomfortable. And I feel like that's because, solar energy is visibility energy. It brings things into the light. It asks us to stop hiding our strengths and to stop minimizing our gifts and to stop pretending we are less, or, less powerful, less passionate, less creative, less alive than we really are. And that's not always comfortable. A lot of us were taught to be manageable, to be agreeable, to be easy to understand, to be small enough that no one ever felt threatened by our presence. But when we're in this Sabbath of Litha, it comes with all this fire and all this brightness and all this solar force, and it can just stir up these places that we've learned to dim ourselves, where, we're afraid of to be seen wanting something, afraid of, being seen enjoying ourselves, to be seen proud and to be seen taking up space, and, you know, afraid to be seen burning brightly because somewhere someone told us we were too much. The thing is that fire does not apologize for being fire. The sun does not rise and ask if it's being dramatic. Bonfires don't shrink because someone is uncomfortable with the heat. And that's part of the lesson here with Litha. It reminds us that our life force is sacred, our passion is sacred, our desire, our joy is sacred, creativity and confidence, that is so sacred, ours within ourselves. But, and that doesn't mean that we burn through the world without awareness. It doesn't mean that we become reckless or, confuse power with domination, because healthy fire knows how to give warmth in it without, consuming everything. And healthy fire knows how to light the way, and it knows how to transform without destroying and, just for the sake of destruction. So that's what we're working with life, though, not uncontrolled fire, sacred fire, kind of fire that brings us back to our bodies. And it reminds us that we're not just spirits floating through life trying to be, enlightened, or bodies living, feeling, wanting bodies, creating bodies. That's our bodies that crave sunlight and movement and touch and laughter and pleasure and rest and aliveness. And that matters because, I feel like sometimes spiritual people can become so focused on healing and shadow work and transcendence that we often forget that we're also here to live, to taste the fruit, to feel the sun on our skin, to laugh loudly and to dance around the fire and to want what we want. There's so much of that we need to remember, to let joy move through our body without immediately trying to analyze it, and life that brings us back to that. And it says to us, you're alive now, not someday, not after you fully heal, not after everything becomes perfect, not, after you become the most polished and peaceful and spiritually evolved, version of yourself. Now, right here in this body, in this season, in this life, that's what it is. It's not, only fire. It's the threshold. It's where the Sabbath, becomes even more magical, because even though Litha is bright and warm and full of life, there's also something strange about it, that in between, that feels like the world is glowing on the edges, and it's that sacred threshold. And with it being the longest day of the year, it gives us one of the longest twilights. And twilight has always been magical. It's not fully day, it's not fully night, it's that space in between. And in witchcraft, those spaces do matter. Dawn, noon, sunset, midnight, twilight, those are called the in-between times, threshold moments, places where the ordinary world feels a little bit thinner, a little bit softer, a little bit more open. And life is that energy, full of that energy. It's the threshold of the wheel of the year. It is light at its peak, but dark is beginning to return. The season is full, but the descent has already started. And we're standing in the brightness. We can feel the shadows stirring at the edge, and that's just such powerful magic to me, because liminal Liminal spaces are where messages come through. They're where intuition gets louder, dreams feel more vivid, omens show up in strange little ways. It's where the veil feels thinner, not necessarily because everything is dark and spooky, but because everything is alive and charged. Midsummer is not the same kind of veil thinning as, Samhain, what we talk about with Samhain. Samhain is this like deep ancestral shadow bone level magic type of veil thinning. Whereas life is different. It's a green veil. It's that green veil magic. It's the spirit in the trees and in the whisper in the grass and the shimmer above the water. That strange feeling when you're not alone in the woods when it goes quiet. That's Litha. It's very, very green. And that's why Litha has always had strong connection with the Fae, with fairy, the fairy realm and folklore because midsummer has been seen for a very long time when the Fae are, as it's been seen most as when the Fae are most active. Excuse me, my words. They're more present, they're more likely to come across our world. You may hear stories of the fairy king and queen passing through at this time, and I do think there's something beautiful about that imagery, but I also think it's important that we do not turn the Fae into cute little glittery pets. Fae are not just tiny winged friends who exist to grant wishes and look adorable and unstationary. They are wild nature spirits, powerful, mysterious, old, unpredictable. We love them. Because depending on the folklore that you work with, they can be helpful, mischievous, dangerous, generous, easily offended, or completely uninterested in human nonsense. So if you're working with Fae energy of life, then just respect matters. Manners matter, boundaries matter. And this is not a, demand things from the Fae kind of practice. This is not, me talking about the Fae and this working with the summer solstice. It's not, ordering, it's not like, ordering spiritual DoorDash from the woods. Fae, it's a relationship that requires reverence. If you feel called to leave an offering, that's fine. Keep it simple, keep it respectful. So we're talking fresh flowers, fresh water, herbs, honey, fruit, a song, a clean space in nature, an act of care for the land. I personally prefer to leave these type of offerings outside for nature to have. I really love leaving out offerings outside for nature to take back as a way of like spirit taking it. So just be very conscious about the things that you're leaving out that could be unsafe. Uh, but it is really nice to come out and see it gone. But I like to leave them outdoors without any expectations. This isn't a bargain, it's not a transaction. It's not, I gave you this, now give me that, but just a gesture of respect. Just a, hey, my lord, lady, hello. Just something. It's just a way of, saying to it all of just like, I see the life around me. I honor the spirits of this place. I am not here to take without giving. And, that's a big part of the life of magic in general. Because it's not about, what we can draw in. It's also about how we participate in this living world. How do we greet the sun? How do we tend to the land? How do we honor the herb before cutting them? How do we thank the flowers before weaving them into crowns? You know, how do we remember that nature is not just a backdrop on our rituals? It is rituals. The bees, the birds, the trees, the fireflies, the storm clouds, the heat rising off the freaking ground, this, down to the most simple of the smell of the grass and smoke and blooming things. All of it is speaking, all of it is part of the spell. So when you're working with the fire and liminal magic of light, though, we are really working with two truths at once. The fire says, be alive, be brave, be visible, feed the flame, call your power back. And the threshold says, pay attention, listen deeper, honor the unseen, respect the spirits of the land, and notice what is shifting at the edge of the light. That is the midsummer magic. Bright, green, strange, and alive. It's just a reminder that the world is not only found in the darkness, it's also found in the sunlight. It's found in the flowers, in the rivers, in the heat, breath, the shimmers between day and night. So if you work with Litha, pay attention to the thresholds, the first light of dawn, the height of noon, the golden hour before sunset, the strange hush of midnight, and don't rush through them. Pause, listen, offer gratitude, and remember that midsummer is, the world is not just bright, it is enchanted. And maybe that's why life it can feel so powerful because it doesn't, only ask us to honor the sun in the sky. It also asks us to honor the sun within ourselves, the part of us that still wants to rise, the part of us that still wants to create and love and desire and lead and express, and so forth. So when we work with the fire at Litha, we're not just lighting candles because it looks pretty. We're calling back our flower, our flower. We're calling back our flower. We're calling back our power. We're feeding the inner flame. We're asking ourselves, where has my fire gone? Where have I been afraid to shine? Where am I confusing humble with being hidden? Where do I need courage? Where do I need warmth? Where do I because fire is not only about brightness, it's about transformation. And Litha reminds us that sometimes the most sacred things we can do is let ourselves become fully lit again. And so, with talking about the folklore and fae and traditions, I really love looking at them with the Sabbats just to really embrace them in their old ways. It's one of the things I love about the summer solstice is that you can find echoes of it all over the world. Different names and cultures and rituals and stories, but again and again we see people gathering around for the same sacred idea. The sun is powerful, the light is holy, the fire means something, and the turning point deserves to be witnessed. And that's one of the most common connections to Litha is the fire. Bonfires were lit on hilltops and people gathered around them. They danced, they celebrated, they jumped over flames for luck, blessing, fertilities, protection, and purification. And when you really think about it, it makes sense because fire is earthly sunlight. It is the sun brought down to our level. It is the thing we gather around. So when people, lit these fires at midsummer, they were not just making light, they were participating in the power of the sun. They were mirroring it, honoring it, calling it closer, and asking that solar strength to bless their bodies and their homes and their families and fields, their relationships, their crops, their livestock, their futures. So, another tradition that connects the solstice, it connected to the solstice is the burning wheel. And parts of paganism in Europe, people would set large straw or wooden wheels on fire, rolling them down hills, typically towards water. But it would symbolize the sun and the wheel itself. It's mirroring the solar darkness, the fire, its heat and light, the rolling motion of the mirroring the sun itself and its movement through the sky. And I There's the heart of light. It's blazing, it's the wheel turning, the light's powerful, but it's also moving, and it doesn't stay fixed in one place. So even if it's at its peak, it's already beginning to descend. And we see those traditions, staying awake through the night because it's the shortest night to greet the sunrise. And there's really something sacred about that too, to sit in the dark and wait for the light, to witness the sun return with your eyes, to meet the day instead of sleeping through it. Because, in some traditions, people will go to really high places, hills, mountains, and sacred sites to watch the sunrise at the summer solstice. And spiritually, it's a beautiful act of devotion. It's not passive. It's not just saying the sun gives me life. It's saying I will rise to meet it. I will meet the sun. I will bring my attention, my awe, my gratitude, my breath, my body. And to me, that's part of the magic. It's not about only receiving power, solar power, but it's about the relationship with it. So there are a lot of stories about people bringing offerings at this time of year of fruit and honey and herbs and grain and flowers, and that carries, the sweetness and abundance of the season. It's not a barren holiday. It's not about sacredity. It's about, what has grown and ripened and opened up and become sweet under the light. So, the offerings often reflect that fullness, and they're bright and they're living and fragrant, golden and alive. The sacred flame showing up in different cultures and traditions. Like in Rome, this time of year, we connected to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, and her sacred fire and her flame. That was not just fire of warmth, it represented a living heart in the community. And it gives us, another layer of Litha, because fire is not passion, not only passion, it is passion. It's not only passion, it's devotion. It's what we tend, the hearth, the altar, the home, the sacred center. And, in Europe, they see connections of the burning, they do their connections with it with the burning of the lamps in honor of Isis, the queen of heaven. So again, that image of the light being kindled and honored and, carried with reverence. And close to the season, you'll also see St. John's Eve, the tradition that typically takes place in New Orleans, where fire, water, dance, drumming, offerings, and serpent energy all come together in celebration of the life force. And then that part is important, because it's not only a solar holiday in the sky, but it's a life force holiday involving the body and its rhythm and its movement. And this is why dancing shows up in the solstice traditions, because sometimes the body understands the season before the mind does. The body knows how to celebrate warmth, to respond to the drums, to move with the fire. It knows what it means to be alive. And that's what brings us to one of the most sensual pieces of life. This has been, it's been seen as a lover's holiday. It's a time for passion, fertility, union, creation, desire, pleasure, connection. And when I say fertility, I don't always mean the literal phase of pregnancy and children, because, fertility is life force. It's about the ability to create, to grow something, to nourish something, to bring something into being. And that that would be a relationship, yes, but it's also a project, a home, a spell, a dream, a version of yourself, a life that you've, finally been brave enough to want and to meet. And life reminds us that creation requires heat. It requires desire. It requires, attraction. It requires that spark that pulls us towards, another and says, let's make something from this. But, it's a sacred union, and it doesn't always mean romance. It's the union of the body and the spirit, light and shadow, fire and water, passion and devotion, desire and intention, the human self and the divine self. And that's why life is such a beautiful time for love, magic, and hand fasting, and, commitment rituals, sensuality work, and creative spell work. Good time to work with the what is that? The sacral and the solar chakra. Um, because the season itself is charged with the energy of coming together, and the sun and the earth are in a deep relationship. The plants are flowering, the fruit is forming, and the bees are moving, from bloom to bloom. And everything's reaching and opening, mating and growing, and that's the world's not shy about being alive. It's part of its medicine. It asks us, where have we become shy with our own selves? Where have we made desire feel shameful and made pleasure unnecessary? And where have we separated spirituality from the body? Where have we told ourselves that sacred means quiet, controlled, and removed from? Because life, it says something different. It says the body is sacred too. The pulse, the heat, the longing, the laughter, the dance, those are sacred. The kiss is sacred. The creativity, that creative impulse is sacred. And this is not, spring's flirtatious first flirtation with life. This is the summer in her fullness. She's plump, she's warm, she's alive, she's juicy, she's willing. And this is the earth showing us what it looks like to not apologize for blooming. And that mythic layer in modern traditions with, pagan traditions, it talks about the story of the Oak King and the Holly King, because the Oak King rules over the waxing half of the year, but if so, from like Yule to Litha, and as the light grows stronger and stronger, but the Holly King returns the waning half of the year from Litha to Yule. So as the days grow shorter, the darkness returns, and the summer solstice, the Oak King reaches his height and is defeated by the Holly King. And it sounds dramatic, and really the myth is about balance. Like the light has excuse me, the light has had its reign. Now the dark begins to rise, not because the light failed and not because the sun is weak, but because the wheel must keep turning. And the myth gives story to what the earth is already doing. It shows us that the year is not a straight line, it's not a cycle. Every season has a ruler, and every forest has its own moment, and every peak has its returning. So when we're looking at the folklore of Litha, we're not just collecting random old customs, or we are seeing how people understood this time. They watched the sky. They honored the fire, gathered herbs, made offerings, they danced, they stayed awake until dawn and told stories of the kings of light and dark, the blessed love, honored fertility. They created life force in its all forms. And they remembered something that we forget. The earth is speaking, the sun is speaking, the body is speaking, desire is speaking. And the season is not background noise, it's sacred rhythm. And, life is one of the great drums in that rhythm. It's bright, burning, golden beat that says, celebrate the light, honor what has grown, feed the flame, love what is alive, and remember that the wheel is turning. And, with working with it, I find makes it easier to engage with the Sabbath, is to know its correspondence and, its magical tools, if you will. Uh, And I want to say before going into that, correspondence is not just about aesthetic. It's not, they're not just pretty things we throw on an altar so it looks seasonal. They're symbols, they're energetic anchors, they're ways of working with the language of the season because every Sabbath has a current, a feeling, a pulse, a type of magic it carries. And with Litha, it carries solar, fertility, fiery, protective, passionate, abundant, and alive type energy. So the tools and correspondence we are using in this time help us connect with that energy more. So starting with color, orange, gold, yellow, red, blue, green. Gold and yellow connect us with the solar power. So that's solar chakra, confidence, success, joy, and illumination. Orange, sacral chakra, brings in creativity, vitality, pleasure, and movement. Red, root chakra, uh, brings passion, life force, desire, courage, and fire. Green, heart chakra. I want to do these for all these colors because you're going to be doing meditations, and this is how you work with your energy too with these colors. So it's not just the colors you put on the altar; it's the energy workings you do with yourselves. And if you don't work with chakras, that's your business. But I'm sure those colors come up somewhere. But green, it connects us to earth and her fullness and the growth and fertility and abundance. Blue, which blue depends on your opinion of chakras and how you see them. Like, is it your third eye or is it your throat? Which one is it? But blue, might feel a little surprising at first for, a fire festival, but it makes sense when you remember that life is also the sun moving into Cancer, which is water, emotion, intuition, protection, the ocean, shore, the cool balance of that heat. So even in the colors, we see the balance of the Sabbath. Fire to heat, or sorry, fire to water, heat to feeling, the sun and the shore, the elements, of fire. And we've already talked about this, but fire is one of the main spiritual forces of the season. And so fire can show up in your practice through candles, bonfires, torches, incense, solar charging, hearth work, or even simply sitting outside in the warmth of the sun with intention. One of my favorite things to do, even when it's not Litha, is to bloom. Sun, go outside, feet in grass, hands to sky, big deep breaths, letting that sun hit you right there on the third eye. You'd be surprised how good you feel after. You don't have to stay there long. I mean, especially if you're in the South, good gravy. You really don't want to, but that's why we do morning sun. But another way of looking at things to work with, gemstones and minerals. So citrine, tiger's eye, bumblebee, emerald and jade. All of these have these correspondence that just dip with everything that we've been saying. Lapis lazuli. I might be saying that wrong. And again, and then, when you're looking at the herbs, you want to look at solar herbs, air, water, fire, protective herbs, healing, love. Most traditional are is St. John's wort, rosemary, sunflower, mugwort, vervain, heather, hemp, lavender, mint, juniper, cedar, rue, oak, meadowsweet, chive, thyme, and rose. And, these are all going through and talking about protection and healing and vitality and remembrance and solar strength, everything that we keep talking about. And it's a really good time to work with abundance and blessing workings, and things like that. And you also have your animal correspondence, so cattle and horses. Cattle brings in, themes of abundance and sustenance and what feeds us and our relationship between the land, the body, and survival. You know, um, and even in marine, you want to look at the aquatic side of it. Crabs connecting beautifully with Cancer, the octopus bringing mystery and intelligence and adaptability. Because even though, life is fiery, it's also a still water current moving through it. So the sun reaches its peak and then it moves into Cancer. So the fire that burns bright, but the shore is right there. The light that is high, but the tide still pulls. It's very water based too, while still being fire. And they even, have notes about connections with birds. You have goldfinches and kingfishers and meadowlarks and owls and robins and wrens, all with the same type of energy as all of our herbs and our citrus and citrus herbs and our crystals and our everything in between. It's all the same energy. So how do you celebrate it? Um, I want to make this very clear too when I say celebrating it. You don't have to make this complicated, That's what so many people are like, well, I can expensive crystals and a fully written, ritual in ancient language. It's just it's powerful already. You don't have to add to it. The sun's already doing its work. The earth is, already in bloom. The fire is already present. Your job is simply to participate. Notice it, honor it, meet it with intention. One of the simplest ways to celebrate life is just to greet the sun. Wake up early and watch it sunrise, or in the morning, just wake up and be like, "Hey, girl," talk to her. I talk to the sun all the time. So, and if you're not a sunrise person, yes, the sunset's fine too. Step outside though and feel the warmth. Let the light touch your skin. Take a breath in and actually be present with it. Say you can say a prayer, speak gratitude. You can simply just stand there and let yourself remember, I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm part of this turning wheel. And one of my ways that I like to celebrate it is make sun tea. Because in the South, before I was a witch, I was a child, and one thing I watched my grandmother do and my mother is make sun tea. You take a jug, glass jug is preferred. If you only have plastic, that's your business, but I don't like plastic. I mean, I work with plastic. Plastic is fine, but like, I get freaked out if a bottle of water is left in my car. Then I go to drink it because I'm like, microplastics. But in a glass jar, put tea bags in, and then just set it out in the sun. And you can watch it too, and you can watch it slow seep and see all the swirls. Um, you can just do regular tea bags, but you can also add fruit and herbs and other things in it, not just black tea. But you're making moon water, but sun equivalent. So you're literally letting the sun infuse your drink with warmth, light, and intention. Um, but another way that I love to see my witchy friends celebrate this holiday is foraging herbs and flowers. So it's one of the classic ways of celebrating the season is the plants are alive and the field is active and the flowers are open. And the herbs are now solar charged. So if you're an herbalist, you can find this beautiful time to gather your inventory. And if you're not an herbalist, you can still gather flowers and leaves and small herbs, things that are abundant and safe to take, but always forage with respect. Know what you're picking. Do not take from endangered plants. Do not take from places sprayed with chemicals. Do not take more than you need. Ask permission from the land. Give thanks. and leave an offering of, if it's part of your practice. Um, it's weird. It's not part of your practice, and I'm not judging you. You can use what you gather though to make a flower crown or an herb bundle, a charm bag, and all spell jars. Pat's being mischievous. Flower crowns are often made and connected during this time. And even, there's even a folklore that says if you sleep with your flower crown under your pillow on summer solstice, you may dream of your future lover. And whether you take that literally or symbolically, I do like it. It turns the crown into a dream charm and, a little woven spell of beauty and desire and possibility. And as the typical does of celebrating the fire festival with a fire, um, you know, it's so if you can, bonfires, fire pit, candle, torch, lantern, a tiny little flame on your altar, one little chime candle. It doesn't have to be big, but you can use it to release. You can write down, dimming your light and writing down what has been dimming your light and safely burn it. You can use fire for empowerment, speak your desire, your prayer, your intention into the flame. You can use the fire for protection. Light a candle and ask that your home, your body, your family, and your path has been blessed and guarded. And you can use fire for gratitude. Name what has grown in your life and let the flame carry your thanks. Dance, move, let your body feel joy. Put on music, move your hips, let yourself sweat, let yourself laugh. Summer is not asking you to be, the sun is not asking you to be composed, it's asking you to be alive. It wants to celebrate. So you can charge all your stuff with this energy too. I save some more for when I need it, and my stuff. Like I gather it, and I use some of it as like in the colder part of the seasons. I'll pull out my yellow crystals from the summer solstice just to bring some brightness to the house, especially in February when we're in those darker seasons that really hit hard with the seasonal depression. But once life has passed, you can take the remaining herbs and wax that you have from your rituals and scatter them in your backyard as a way of offering to the earth, a way of saying, bless this home and this land and all that live here, and may the light that we have gathered continue to protect and nurture us. Another practice again is gratitude, and it's thrown around so much, but it feels sometimes generic, but it's just so powerful to me. And it's when it's not forced, and it's not forced positivity. It's not pretending everything is perfect. It's not bypassing your grief or your stress or your real problems. It's the kind where you stop and say, this is what's good. This is what's grown. This is what I survived long enough to see. This is what's feeding me. This is what I do not want to overlook. On your altar, speak it into the flame, whisper it to the sun. But just let the gratitude become an embodiment. And a good time to rest is during all this. Cleaning and pulling tarot cards and all that. It's good to do, but sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is just let the light touch the part of you that's been tired. Let the warmth soften what has gone tense, and let yourself receive without performing. That's celebration too. So if you're working with life, then ask yourself, what kind of celebration does your spirit actually need? Does it need fire, movement, passion, stillness, gratitude, love? Do you just need to gather some herbs? Do you need to just sit in the sun and remember that you're allowed to be here, and that there's no, right way to celebrate the Sabbath? It's the point. The point is just to meet the season, to honor the light, to bless the growth, to gather strength for what's coming, and to participate in whatever you can with the living magic of the world around you. And I do want to point out the shadow work that comes with the Sabbath. And it's already what I've been talking about with all of this. It's just, everything is in the dark. Everything that's in the dark is easier to hide. And this brightness really reveals it. And it can be easier to avoid and to stay quiet and to stay unseen, to keep certain truths tucked away where no one has, looked too closely. But Litha is full light. It shows us what we've been avoiding. It shows us where we are not blooming, but it also shows us, where we are. It shows us that, growth, what has been growing strong, but it also shows us what's withering. It can, show us where we feel alive, but also show us where the fire has gone low. And that can be uncomfortable because it asks, what happens when you're fully seen? Not just when you're struggling, not when you're healing, not just when you're useful or needed or holding everything together, but seen in your power, your joy, and your confidence. For a lot of us, there is more vulnerable, that's more vulnerable than being, seen in pain because pain can look familiar. Struggle can be familiar. Being needed is familiar, but being relevant, being happy and proud and loved and abundant, being fully alive without apologizing for it, that can bring up a whole different kind of fear. So one of, some of the questions that are asked with life is, where am I afraid to shine? Where have I made myself smaller so other people could be more comfortable? Where have I confused humility with hiding? And where have I decided that being powerful means unsafe and selfish and dramatic or too much? Because many of us learned early on that our light had consequences. Maybe we were celebrated only when we were convenient. Maybe our confidence was called arrogance and our passions were called intensity and our needs were called too much. Maybe our joy was interrupted so that's, maybe our joy was interrupted so many times that we stopped trusting it. And, maybe everything good came with a catch. So now when life feels warm, we start looking for the storm. But another piece of the shadow work is like, can I let myself receive joy without bracing for loss? Because like I said before, the peak of light, but it's also when the dark begins. And if we're not careful, we can turn that into anxiety. It can be like, well, if the dark's coming, why enjoy the light? And if this moment will not last, why trust it? And if everything changes, why let myself open up? But the thing is that life, again, does not teach us to cling. It does, doesn't not and it does not teach us to close. It teaches us to, about presence and how to hold joy in open hands and let warmth be warmth and beauty be beauty and to let good seasons be good without needing a guarantee that it'll never end. That's hard work. Our nervous system learned that peace is temporary and love is conditional and good things always disappear. So like the shadow work, it's not only about confidence and visibility, it's also about safety. Can my body feel safe in joy? Can my spirit feel safe in abundance? Can I stop scanning for disappointment long enough to receive what's here? Can I let myself enjoy this moment without making myself pay for it in advance? And so, there's also the shadow of desire with it. Life is passionate and fertility and creativity and sensuality. So it asks, what do I really want? Not what sounds reasonable, not what keeps everyone comfortable, not what makes me look spiritual or selfless or productive or, easy to love. What do I want? What is my body reaching for? What is my creativity craving? What part of my life needs more heat? Where have I gone numb because wanting felt too risky? And where have I made peace with life that does not fully feed me? Because, that can be confronting. Desire is honest and it shows us where we're hungry. And sometimes we call ourselves content rather than admitting that we're starving. But life, it brings its pulse back. It reminds us that wanting is not automatically wrong, that pleasure is not automatically shallow, confidence is not automatically ego, aliveness is not something we have to, earn after enough suffering. We're allowed to want and to create and enjoy and to move. And at this turning point, in asking us to look at what has reached its peak, well, what in my life has grown so far as it can grow in its current form, and what season is completing, and what am I trying to keep in full bloom even though it's ready to change? So that's not just relationships, it's everything from identities to roles to practice to projects, dreams, patterns, old versions of ourselves. Sometimes something reaching its peak does not mean it's failed, it just means it's completed its purpose. And, it can be hard, it can be a hard truth, but because we love to think that if something's good, it's always going to stay, but the wheel doesn't work that way. Sometimes things bloom and become fruit. Sometimes things bloom and fall away. Show us who we are now and then ask us to be someone else. So, it really asks us to celebrate honestly. to say this is beautiful, and also this may be changing. This has grown, and also it may not grow further from this moment. But the season gave me something, and I, may need to release my grip from the next season before the next season can commit and can begin. So keep asking yourself these questions during the season and letting yourself really shine, and stop asking and waiting for permission, because it's going to remind us that the light will not stay forever. So while we're here, we better stand in it, and receive it. And when the dark begins to return, we don't have to enter it empty. We can enter it carrying the fire. And, as I close out this episode about Litha, I want to come back to the heart of it. Again, longest day, peak energy, light stretching as far as it can go, everything in bloom. It's not only about surviving, it's something to feel and something to taste and honor and participate in. It reminds us that we're allowed to be full, we're allowed to be bright, we're allowed to want and to create and to love and to take up space. But it also reminds us that every peak is a threshold. It reaches its height, and then the dark begins its quiet return. And so it's not a punishment, it's not a loss, it's not something to fear, but it's part of the sacred rhythm, because the wheel is always turning. And maybe that is the deeper medicine of the Sabbath, is to celebrate without clinging, to receive joy without bracing for its end, and to honor what has grown without demanding, it stay forever. To let the fire warm us while, it's here, and gather enough light within ourselves to carry forward when the dark part of the year starts to roll in. So this light, then, may you notice what is blooming in your life. May you honor what has grown. May you feed your inner fire. May you remember that your joy is not frivolous, and your desire is not shameful, and your confidence is not arrogance. You're allowed to stand in your light. You're allowed to receive warmth. You're allowed to bring, become bright like the season. And when the wheel turns, as it always does, may you trust the light that has, that has not been lost, and it was gathered, and it was remembered, and it was carried into you. And so until next time, may the sun guide you and the earth ground you.